Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Devontae Miller, Stephon Clark, Philando Castile is simply a small portion of a long list of people who have been wrongfully beaten, injured, or killed by police officers who have not been rightfully held accountable for their actions. The law works in a mysterious way that I would never understand. Now, if I were to look back at a year, or maybe 2 years ago, or even 5 years ago, I guarantee you I'd find an article about an innocent man or woman who has been murdered by a police officer who is currently not in jail, never got charged, or their charges got dropped. Don't believe me? George Floyd 2020, Stephon Clark 2018, Geneva Fonville 2015. Let's not forget Devontae Miller, a young black Canadian who was beaten for no good reason. This has been happening for years now, and we as a black community have been screaming, begging for help, begging for a change. When I read and see cases like these, to me it feels like the same people who swore an oath to uphold and enforce the law are not being judged by the same law. When it comes to the law, you would think no matter your race, occupation, background, or status have anything to do with the laws you are charged with. The law is the law, and that's how it should be, just like murder should be murder. Taking another human's life, especially if it could have been avoided, should not go unpunished. There should be no difference between a cop taking an innocent person's life and a gardener taking an innocent person's life. For those who don't know me, I'm a black teen living in Canada, and I'm scared. There are many things to be scared about in this world, being heights, spiders, clowns, or even the world itself. No, I'm scared of the people who are trained to protect people like you and I. With that being said, our law enforcement officers need to be held accountable the same way as me and you if they too break the law. 2020, what a terrible year we've all had. I think I speak on behalf of the majority of the world when I say I'm glad 2021 is here. But even in the darkest times, I always like to find a positive in something. The positive I chose from 2020 was George Floyd. Now you may be thinking why I would choose a tragic and terrible event as my positive. That's because in my eyes, the terrible event that happened to George Floyd was a light switch to many people across the world saying, this is what's happening and it's wrong. For years now, people have been murdered by law enforcement around the world, working for a system where they are sometimes allowed to go unchallenged, unprosecuted, and subsequently walk free of charge. Historically, black people have been beaten, tragically injured, and murdered, but for some reason, we're not given the light of day to speak up on these issues, or the ones that did listen belong to a very small population in this massive world we live in. Part of that has to do with where you live, what you were taught, your background, and especially what you're exposed to not only in the community but life itself, as well as what you're exposed to on social media. The video that was released of George Floyd spread fast no matter if you're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, watching the TV, reading the newspaper, you would have heard or came across what happened to George Floyd. Now back to my positive mindset, I believe when people say they were thinking this is wrong, and when the world realized what was happening, because now they've seen the proof, the protests started, the riots, old charge cases started to come back up, and people who were wrongfully killed whose murderer walked free, they started to get recognized by the public. Floyd was only approximately 1,100 people killed annually by police use of force in the United States in recent years, according to the data compiled by Fatal Encounters, a nonprofit that tracks police-involved deaths since 2000. A disproportionate number of people killed like Floyd are African American. Unlike the US, here in Canada the numbers are smaller but equally as significant and important to be addressed. I wanted to bring this topic up to highlight the call to action address these issues what has been grown from those who stood up, spoke up, and to those who listened and called for change to how police operate. With that being said, many changes still need to be done, like those being held accountable for wrongful murders, but because that topic has been brought up and now in people's minds, the legal system needs to change. Laws or rules are put in place for you to follow and not to break. And when you do break those laws, certain punishments have been put in place by the government or a judge determines your punishment. It should go without saying that murder, especially when it's not an accident, should be punishable, and in certain situations, when the murderer is a law enforcement officer, I believe they should be held to a higher degree of law because they are trained and taught on how to enforce it. Police should not be held less accountable for their action just because they are police. They are human just like the rest of us and should be charged under the same laws. Though it says they do, there have been many examples when it seems like they are above the law. George Floyd is a shameful example when a police officer cut off circulation to a man that was handcuffed while 3 other police officers watched without intervention. Without compassion as he did, even though he tried to tell the officers he couldn't breathe. The officer kept his knee on his neck even though he was unconscious. George Floyd died, and the most serious charge was second-degree murder given to the man with his knee on George's neck. Note that the first charge that was given was third-degree murder. After fighting the legal system, the man was sent to jail only to be bailed out after. Now, why is it alright for a police officer to murder someone? The world has video proof of it, and yet still be bailed for that individual. If this was me or you, best believe we would be in jail for years. A review of the data we have been police prosecuted shows that it's uncommon for police officers to face any kind of legal consequence, let alone be convicted for committing fatal violences against civilians. I'm not the only one who's seen this trend and seen that this is wrong. There was a survey done in 2020 of the numbers of non-federal police officers arrested for murders who have been convicted between 2005 and 2020. By charge, out of 42 different officers, 5 were convicted of murder. You're probably thinking to yourself, that didn't all 42 officers commit murder, so why are only 5 of them convicted of murder? I'm asking myself the same question. Why do police officers get away with this? It's wrong and it needs to stop. For years now, this has been going on and should not be allowed to continue, and it's time for it to come to an end. Earlier, I briefly talked about me being scared for my life, and I just want to expand on that and share my thoughts. It should be comforting knowing we have people like the police officers protecting us from the bad people in this world. But that being said, it's not so comforting knowing that what the cops are doing, seeing it, and seeing how many victims there are that come from cops is scary. And at the top of the law, as said earlier, a disproportionate number of people killed like Floyd are black, much like myself. If I'm seeing all these cases of African Americans wrongfully being killed, why would I not have a little fear in my heart? Because that could happen to me. A police officer can think I'm dangerous or a threat. A police officer nowadays can avoid legal sanctions for using lethal force against a person by simply saying the latter made the officer feel like he had fear for his life. That's scary to think that all a police officer has to get charge free is to think he or she is in life or a life is in danger. That is not a society I would like to live in. As a matter of fact, that is not a society anybody should want to live in, no matter your race or background. The police are here to protect us, so we should not feel scared of the protection that has been put in place in society today. With everything I've just told you, do you believe the legal system warrants a change, more specifically focus on policing and law enforcement, and the issues that have been highlighted in 2020? I believe it does, so that we can avoid another Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Devontae Miller, Stephon Clark, Philando Castile story in the news.